Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to AirAsia. So we are about 30% more people than I really expected to accept our invitation, and we are really grateful for you for coming all the way out here to Red Q to listen to this topic, which can sound pretty dry. But what I will promise you today is we will try to make it, as we dissect this topic, anything but boring. So I will start by sharing with you a little anecdote of how I got started. About October 2010, my boss, Tony Fernandez, just came to me. We were still very much deep in the pandemic. Most of the flights were not flying. And he said, Mun Ching, you will take over sustainability. And my reaction was, Tony, why are you giving me this when there's no money to spend on anything? So his response, being classic Tony, was, well, this is the best time because this is when you can be most resourceful and creative. So he wasn't wrong, and we had really to be very resourceful. So in the first 12 months, what we did was really to have a crash course in aviation sustainability. So much has happened in the industry. I was new to it, right? And in terms of international obligations, CORSIA, for those who know about the international scheme to offset, sorry, the lights were a bit distracting. It had already kicked in by 2019, and we were, to be honest, not prepared for it at all. So what I did at the beginning was to gather a lot of data and begin to build models to understand what is our position and where do we stand. And the results were very, very revealing. One of the most important things that I found out, and nobody in the company knew at the time, was that in 2019, we had the lowest carbon emissions per seat of any airline. We were lower than Ryanair, we were lower than EasyJet, we were way below JetBlue. So how is it that we were so good in our environmental achievements, we didn't even realize that? Because a lot of things have changed. Since the pandemic, a lot of changes to our network, which we are slowly trying to rebuild. And there are a lot of airlines who have taken deliveries of new aircraft, which we have to put on hold till next year. So a lot of people have got lower carbon intensities. But as we start taking deliveries of our new aircraft, I can promise you we will get back to the lowest again. Secondly, the other thing that I learned from this exercise is that sustainability is really not about money. It's really not about how much you spend. Now, AirAsia has always had a very strong drive for fuel efficiency. When you think about it, more than 90% of our carbon emissions come directly from fuel consumption. And if we can reduce our fuel consumption, we will directly reduce our carbon emissions. Now, so if we can focus our resources in doing what we do best, cut our fuel consumption, we will directly address our environmental emissions as well. So it's not about spending money. We can cut our costs and cut our emissions. So when I began explaining all these things to people, whether it's internal or external, the reaction was that, well, we didn't know all this about sustainability. Can you talk to more people about it? So I've been going around talking both internally. We had a very big management meeting last year of 200 of our regional management, and we shared this whole picture. We have an ongoing sustainability working group meetings, which takes place every quarter to get everybody up to speed. But on top of that, we've also had more external engagements. Many of you are from banks, financial institutions, who have been also bombarding us with ESG compliance due diligence. And those are some of the questions we've been answering as well. But we thought, instead of us going one by one, why don't we get everybody together? So today is not only a journey for me to share with you some of the things I've learned. It's a really fascinating topic. But at the same time, to also get you thinking about what you can do to join us on this journey together. So lastly, I hope to be able to answer as many questions as you might have on ESG and the challenges and opportunities for us to meet our goals. Now, you probably have come across many of these things in the media. Can aviation get to net zero? A quick answer is no, not with the technologies and solutions we have right now. But at the same time, if we all get together and start putting these building blocks in place, we actually have a fighting chance. So, with that introduction, I would like to get started. So what is sustainability? This is the bane of my existence. When I first started, everybody said that this is about CSR. When are you going to organize a tree planting activity? And that is the last thing on my mind. Sustainability really is about building the blocks for our growth into the future. Now, we benchmark against several indexes, some of the top in the world. FTSE for Good, Dow Jones, Thailand Stock Exchange, its Sustainability Index. And what this exercise has revealed to us is where our gaps are. And it has really, really been revealing. It has helped us understand our business better. It has helped us understand where are the areas that we really need to tackle for us to grow better into the future. Second is really about minimizing our consumption of resources. Of course, I talk about fuel, but fuel isn't the only thing. It's about energy consumption in our buildings, water consumption. What do we manage for plastics? And the third one is to really minimize and mitigate the externalities that we generate. Carbon emissions obviously being one of them, but that's not the only one. Now, for those of you who are old enough to have been to Bali 20 years ago, you will notice the big difference in Bali 20 years ago and today. The kind of congestion, pollution that basically has destroyed a lot of the charm of many of these places. And unfortunately, we are a big contributor to that. So the next step of our journey is how do we also address our external responsibilities. My colleague is here from Thailand, Topaz. She started an amazing program called Journey D, which brought AirAsia to many of the villages in Thailand to get them to learn about sustainable tourism so that we can also bring tourism to communities, but in a managed way, so it doesn't also cause destruction of the environment and social fabric. So those are some of the things that we have been working on. Next, why is it good for business? Now, first thing I already mentioned is good for cutting costs. You can cut carbon emissions, you can cut fuel, you cut costs. No brainer. Second one is how do we shape regulation? Obviously, a lot of these things are happening overnight. When I first took over this portfolio, nobody was really talking about sustainable aviation fuels. Today, everybody is talking about mandates, carbon taxes. Now, if you are sleeping through this whole process, these regulations are going to change without you knowing, and you wake up a year later facing a carbon tax and soft mandate. Being on top of this helps us discuss, engage with regulators, policymakers, in order for us to also shape regulation that doesn't kill our business, but at the same time meet the commitments that governments need to meet. The third is to minimize our risks. If you don't know where your gaps are, you can't deal with it. So the exercise that we have been doing in benchmarking has helped us uncover a lot of areas that we really, really need to do a lot of work. The fourth is to gain an advantage. The future of business is going to be determined by how you manage the cost of carbon. Any business that does not factor in your carbon costs into your business will fail. And the one that is prepared will be the one that thrives in the future. And the last is to create new opportunities. Obviously, this is not just a negative scenario that we have to keep raising prices. There are huge opportunities in the green economy. Can we take advantage of that? So that's the big question. So in AirAsia, we came up with 6 strategic drivers covering all 3 pillars: environment, social, and governance. First is cutting carbon footprint. It's not just about our flights, but it has to go across our entire supply chain. So ADE, our engineering arm, is building our first green hangar. It's going to be better use of energy, better use of water, waste management facilities. Waste is an important part. We generate a lot of waste on the flights. We generate huge amounts of waste in our engineering practices. So how do we manage this waste? All these are high value waste. How do we return value from the waste that we have? And today, we will invite you for the first time to our engineering complex, where you will actually witness some of the initiatives that we have done throughout the years to manage our aviation parts and aviation waste. So you will have a better picture of that. The third is to create an enabling and inclusive work environment. So I think, you come to AirAsia Red, you feel an energy. This is something we're very proud of. We want everybody to feel like an all-star, to feel like you want to come to work and you want to do your best. And of course, investing in our communities. I already spoke a little bit about sustainable travel. This is going to be the future of travel. We can't keep bringing people to the same places, Angkor Wat, Bali, Phuket, over and over and over again. They have to spread out, but how do we manage how this tourism is going to grow? Last, the fifth is actually to strive for best practice. We don't compare ourselves to the neighbor. We compare ourselves to the best in the world. And that's how we have become the best in the world. So this is a continuous process of improvement for us within AirAsia. Last, of course, to innovate and to raise the bar. Now, today I will share with you some examples where we are not a follower, we are the leader. And because we are the leader, other airlines follow in our footsteps. That's how we are changing the industry as well. And it's something we're very proud of. Okay? So let's go next. Now, this is a very interesting timeline. We've always had a timeline in AirAsia. We say, like, oh, we launched this flight here and we launched that flight here. But this is actually an ESG history of AirAsia. So the top part you will see is our social achievements, and the bottom part are our environmental achievements. So in the social part, the part I'm really proud of is how aviation has been opened up to women, myself including. So if you think about a female pilot in Southeast Asia, the first thing you think about is AirAsia. Why? Because when I first started at AirAsia in 2004, there was one female pilot. Today we have 160. Okay, it's still a long way to go, but it's still a huge achievement. Second one is to extend the cabin crew retirement age. It sounds totally anachronistic now, but when I first started, cabin crew had to retire by the age of 35. Presumably, somebody thinks that women who are over the age of 35 should not be cabin crew, which is ridiculous. So what did we do? We extended it to 55. If you don't want your very well-trained crew who know how to handle the most difficult passengers, come to AirAsia. And that's how we have done it. Now today, we have mothers and daughters who are flying with us, and we're extremely proud of that. They've been featured in our ads. They've been fantastic for our branding. Another one I want to point out is in 2008, we employed our first in-house counselor. Mental health was not discussed in Asia before that. We were the first. Okay, and what was interesting was like several years later, Typhoon Haiyan, Typhoon Haiyan, if you guys remember, was devastating for the Philippines. And what was really interesting is because we had an in-house counselor, we could send her to Tacloban, which was virtually destroyed, to talk to our staff. We had 24 staff or 27 staff who actually survived the tsunami or the storm. Okay, they lost everything. Some of them lost family members. Now our counselor was able to go there, help them process their trauma, and move on. I remember when I went to see them 2 weeks later, they came to me, all these guys, and they said, "Ma'am, we all cried together." The crying process was the first step for them to begin to heal. And that was what we have carried through today. Mental health remains an important thing within AirAsia. Of course, since I mentioned the Philippines, the power of the brand, we only realized it also during Tacloban. So it was so devastating that Tony thought we need to do something. So he said, "Munching, you're going to run a fundraising drive across our entire network. We're going to raise money for the Philippines." And I was thinking, who is going to give an airline money to rebuild anything? And so we did it anyway. Within 2 weeks, we put donation boxes across all our flights. In 6 weeks, we collected $1 million. We matched another $1 million. We had $2 million, which we used to fund disaster resilient housing in the Philippines. Subsequently, we did many more drives. In total, we have raised over $4 million, covering disasters across the region. We've built schools in Nepal, with disaster resilient schools in Nepal. We have also funded the coastline redrawing, mapping in Palu after the tsunami in Palu a few years back. So those are some of our social contributions, which may not become immediately evident until we look at this big picture, which is called sustainability. The bottom part is really about environment. And I will go into more detail, but I do want to point out one thing. Today, when you fly on AirAsia, you actually can do it completely paperless. You can use your phone throughout the entire process from booking to your boarding pass. Of course, that's consumer fronting. But what you do not know is behind the scenes, we have done huge amounts to reduce paper utilization. And a lot of these actually opportunities were created during COVID. So if you sit in front of the cabin, you will see that when the ground staff and the cabin crew are talking just before a flight, they will always be exchanging a lot of papers. Now, in the past, every flight is accompanied by 25 to 30 sheets of paper. These are physical pieces of paper that have to be printed out, manually filled in, and subsequently we have to keep them somewhere because for regulation purposes, we need to keep them up to 7 years. So can you imagine the amount of paper that we have, the warehousing that we need, and when you have to do an audit, it's hell to dig through these papers. So during COVID, we engaged with all the regulators, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and we got a huge amount of this put online. So everything is now well, not everything, half of it is on documents. And through this exercise alone, we save 16 million sheets of paper every year. So that's driving innovation, right? So let's go into net zero. Obviously, the big question of aviation is, can we get to net zero by 2050 and how do we do it? Now, every airline faces these four choices. The first is to upgrade your aircraft. The newer your aircraft is, just like your car, the better your consumption will be. Secondly is operational improvements. What are those? We'll go into that a little bit more. The third one is sustainable aviation fuels. These are biofuels alternatives, which are not fossil derived. Okay, so that's the big question now. How many airlines can transition to use biofuels? And the last bit is whatever left over that we cannot manage through these first three categories, we will have to buy carbon offsets. Now, each airline will face these four choices. Now, how much you will save and how much you will spend depend on how you manage each of these. If your operational improvements are really barely existent, then you just have to pay more for staff. But if you're actually doing very well on your operational efficiencies, then you pay less. So who's going to be most competitive will be how you manage this. So aircraft. Now, why is aircraft important? I'm going to put this in very layman terms because that's how I have had to learn it. If you fly an empty A320 and an empty 321neo, it's about the same amount of fuel that you consume. But the 321neo has 60 more seats. That's how an airline can manage growth without growing emissions. Now, when you do this, the carbon emissions per seat will fall dramatically. You can grow your capacity in very congested airports without putting extra flights. This is a very, very important tool. We are investing billions into this because we have purchased or we have an order 362 Airbus 321neos, which will cover our fleet expansion and fleet replacement needs up to 2035. We'll have more discussion about this later. The second one is our operational eco-efficiency. In the booklet that you have, it's called Green Operating Procedures, different names for it, but it's the same thing. So basically, how you fly the plane is like how you drive a car. How you drive a car and how much you step on the gas is going to determine how much fuel you consume. So it's the same for an aircraft. The most fuel-consuming part of a flight is during the climb and the ascent, and as well as when the plane descends. In the cruise, it's pretty steady. But how well we reduce our emissions per flight is based on how do we manage the fuel consumption during these two portions of the flight. So I've shown some examples here. Explanations of all these things are in your booklet. So for example, one engine taxi, I will explain a little bit more. Opti-climb. Now, opti-climb is how you ascend the aircraft. And I have to say that AirAsia is an industry leader in this. So we were the first to use opti-climb from SITA as one of our software to help us calculate the best climb procedures. And after we began using it and show results for it, airlines such as Indigo and Singapore Airlines adopted it. The second one is RNPAR. I will show you. It sounds really jargony, but basically it's like Waze. You're using, because we have very modern fleet, we can use the aircraft navigational devices to calculate a shorter approach to the airport as opposed to using older land-based navigational pointers. So as a result of that, that can reduce our flight length and the fuel consumption by quite a considerable amount. And then there are other things that we are doing to reduce weight on board. We have already moved all our documents in the cabin onto e-tablets. We manage our water consumption. And all these procedures not only reduce the consumption itself, but it reduces the amount of fuel we need to carry for a flight, which then makes the aircraft lighter, and you also consume less because of that. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle. Now, why is this important for us? Because in many airlines, if you see, some of it sounds really little, 5 kg, 2 kg, 3 kg. A lot of airlines really don't care about this. Right? They think like, oh, this is so small, I can't be bothered. But our fuel efficiency strategy is based on saving every small bit, and we combine it all together, it adds up to a considerable amount. How much? So let's look at one example, one engine taxi. One engine taxi basically means using one engine when you're taxi on the ground. So basically, when your aircraft lands, after a cooling down period, the pilot can turn off one engine and power in to the bay with only one engine. Similarly, when you take off, they can power up to taxiway with one engine and before they turn it on for takeoff. Now, in small airports, not a big difference, but in huge airports, is a big difference. If any of you have traveled on AirAsia to Changi recently, that taxi is about 15 minutes. The aircraft is rolling on the ground for about 10-15 minutes. How much fuel is being consumed there if we do not do this? Now, we are one of the best practice applicants of single engine taxi. You can see our compliance rate for arrival is 100%. Every single one of our flights in 2022 were performed using single engine taxi. I've looked at some other industry comparisons. Recently, I was in a conference or in a workshop. I saw that most of the applicants were doing about 20 to 30% application. In some other, maybe North America, Jonathan, you probably will share, it will be about 60, about 60. And we are the only ones who have achieved 100%. And this has been recognized by Airbus as the industry-leading best-in-class practice. Now, what does that mean when you talk about this? Let's look at some numbers. Between 2016 and 2022, we avoided 123,000 tons of carbon dioxide, right? Let's look at it in monetary terms. We saved $25 million in fuel. And single engine taxi is only one of 20 such procedures we are currently operating. So the numbers are huge, and we will share more about that later. So the ones that I mentioned earlier, these are called airline procedures. These are what airlines can do to reduce our emissions. But of course, as we do more, we come to also a less steep slope, right? Compared to another airline which does nothing, obviously the amount that we can save reduces as we go along. But there is a lot more we can unlock. Now recently, well not recently, end of 2021 I believe, I attended the Airbus forum online. So the CEO of EasyJet, so he was complaining and he said that Eurocontrol should be increasing the efficiency of airspace management. And if they did that, in Europe, they could save 15% on fuel consumption for airlines. And I was thinking, if Europe can do 15% savings, what about this region? We don't even have a centralized body like Eurocontrol to look at regional airspace management. We are looking at individual countries who have their own peculiarities. So what we did with Jonathan was he extracted this chart for me. So this is a very first look at the regional efficiency. If you look at this, these are only talking about international routes. The red lines show how the least inefficient flights. Basically, it means that we are flying 10% longer than we really need to fly. The yellow ones, 5%, 5 to 10% longer. Green ones are between 2 to 3% margin. Now, if all the ASEAN governments can get together and start looking at these international routes, this will help airlines everywhere in the entire region cut emissions, cut fuel consumption, cut costs. Right? So hopefully for the regulators who are here, we hope that this is something you can also begin looking into, and we'll be very, very happy to engage on this. Now, the third one is sustainable aviation fuels. What is it? Sustainable aviation fuel is an alternative to fossil fuels. It can be produced from waste or agricultural products. So for example, if you're talking about something that's produced out of used cooking oil, it's processed, it can save up to 80% of carbon emissions on a life cycle basis. Now, what does life cycle basis mean? Now, if you actually burn SAF or fossil fuel on an aircraft, it's the same amount of carbon is generated, pretty much. The real savings is in the production process. Obviously, when you extract jet fuel from the ground, there's a lot of emissions from the extraction process. But if you are taking used cooking oil, which is a waste product, which is a pollutant as well, process it and turn value out of it, that's where you get your 80% life cycle savings. Now, this is pretty complex. I won't go into it because Christoph, expert from AirAsia, is going to share a lot more about SAF later. Now, what we need to know today is that we don't need to do anything to upgrade AirAsia aircraft. All our aircraft are certified by Airbus to fly with up to 50% blend of sustainable aviation fuels. Now, the big challenge, when I started 2 years ago, SAF was like this pipe dream, right? So far away, nobody thinks that it's going to happen here. But in June, I was down in Singapore. Our friends from Neste are here. they've just opened the world's biggest SAF refinery in Singapore. Supply is not the issue. Price is the issue. SAF is currently priced between 2 to 5 times that of jet fuel. Now, let me put this in context for you. We have 50% of our cost is on fuel alone. If you are going to put 5 times premium on our fuel, you can shut us down. So how do we manage this cost and introduce these into AirAsia? Now, I did this very simple calculation. It's basically with some simple assumptions. I assume that we grow from now to 2050, it goes down from 5% every year down to 1%. And then I have SAF pricing, which goes down from 3.5 times of jet fuel down to 1.5 times of jet fuel. The number in between SAF consumption is actually tracking the Refuel EU SAF mandate. So just look at it. In 2025, if we just introduce 2% consumption of SAF into AirAsia, Bo will have to find 75 million from somewhere to plug that hole, right? And that's every year, not one time, right? By 2050, well, we'll be retired, Bo. Good luck to the person next. Have to come 760 million a year to pay for just the premium on SAF. Premium, yeah? Not even the full cost. So how are we going to manage it? How much can we pass on to the consumers, right? So this is a very, very big question to answer. And that's why we have governments here, banks here, because without financing, without credit lines, it's not going to happen. Next is carbon offsetting. Now, aviation is unique because it's the only industry of any industry to have a harmonized approach to reducing international emissions from flights. Now, what does this mean? It basically means that all the countries that are part of ICAO can opt now to participate in this scheme. So for all intents and purposes, all AirAsia airlines are in it because Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, and most recently Cambodia have opted into CORSIA. So it means that any flight between the two countries, any two countries that are part of CORSIA, would have to be included in this scheme. So CORSIA says that the aviation industry has to cap its emissions at a 2019 level. Anything that is above the 2019 levels, you have to offset. You have to find a way to reduce it. Now, when this thing came up, there was no plan for COVID, so it would have gone up this way, right? And by now, we would have to be buying offsets. So in a way, there's a little silver lining. COVID bought us a few years. And you can see that the actual emissions went down to 2021, lowest, and then it goes up again. Today, we are still operating about 70% of our fleet. We're not going to hit the baseline, so we're not going to have to offset this year. But it's going to happen by 2024. Why? Now, ICAO got together last year and they decided that it's too long for aviation to wait. It could be 2026 before we get back to 2019 levels. So the countries that are members of ICAO have decided to lower the baseline to 85% of 2019 levels. So you will see the baseline drop, right? So the chances of us having to offset will be pretty high. And then another one I want to point out is 2027. Why is there such a big jump in 2027? Currently, CORSIA is a voluntary scheme. Countries choose to operate, participate in it. Currently, it excludes the two major countries in this region, which are India and China. By 2027, these countries are expected to join the scheme, and that's where you can see a big spike, right? So what does that also mean in terms of monetary terms? Now, if we follow the plan that I showed you earlier to use SAF, we don't need to consider offsets at all. Whatever we consume in SAF will more than take care of our compliance requirements. But let's look at an alternative if you don't buy SAF. You can also buy carbon credits as an alternative. Now, I have put two lines here. It's just based on a very, very conservative assumption of 1% growth over our 2019 levels from 2024 onwards. So by 2024, if the CORSIA offsetting price is between $3 per ton, growing up to $10 per ton by 2027, we will have to start putting aside $90,000 a year in AirAsia to meet our offsetting obligations. And this goes up to 2.1 million by 2027. But carbon offsets, for those of you who are in it, Bursa guys are here, will know that the chances of you getting $3 per ton is so low you probably shouldn't consider it, right? A more realistic scenario is looking at a $10 per ton and upwards. So if you have a $10 per ton going up to $20 per ton by 2027, the numbers change dramatically. By 2024, well, we'll have to find 300,000 somewhere, and by 2027, it goes up to 4.3 million, right? So you will see the big stark differences between carbon offset pricing and SAF pricing. Obviously, for business purposes, for airlines, carbon offset is a better option, but that's not going to help the industry grow up. So it will have to be a balance of both. Now, what are the challenges in using offsets? Let's look at this. This is a regional picture of CORSIA eligible carbon credits. Now, there's all this talk about greenwashing. So CORSIA has very, very tight standards and regulations on what can be accepted for aviation offsetting. Now, this is as of last week. There are only 7 projects in Southeast Asia that we can offset. And the big 2 red zeros is Philippines and Malaysia. There's nothing we can buy in Malaysia. There's nothing we can buy in Philippines. So what does that mean? For all intents and purposes, for us in AirAsia, doesn't really matter. We can buy from Africa. We can buy from New Zealand. But is this what we want for our countries? As it is, the environmental sectors in our region is desperately underfunded. If industry have to pump money into this, how are we going to benefit the environmental projects in our countries if they are not certified? So there's a lot of work for us to do, and these will be the things that we will bring forth to the Ministry of Environments of the respective ASEAN countries. This has to be addressed. Otherwise, there's no point forcing aviation to decarbonize and buy carbon credits, and you will not be able to benefit within the region. So this is my last slide. So we talked a lot about the challenges, but where are our opportunities? So I hope today I've been able in a short way to convey to you the value proposition that we have for you as an airline with one of the lowest carbon emissions in the region. Secondly, as consumer behavior change and people become more conscious about the traveling impact, they're going to be looking for airlines with lower carbon emissions. This is where we're going to have a huge advantage. Of course, we talked about fuel and emission savings through efficient airspace management. This is not just going to benefit AirAsia, it's going to benefit everyone. And this is something we need to work on as a region. The next is carbon offsetting as an ancillary product. Once we put in place the mechanisms for aviation, it can extend across the entire capital A group. We have ride sharing, we have food delivery, we have cargo. All these guys can also begin having voluntary offsetting. And that greatly increases the potential for us to collect carbon offset pricing over time. Of course, there's ESG financing. Okay, and we know that banks, you also have your own targets. You will have to start looking at your portfolio on where you have to, the assets that you hold, which have to be ESG compliant. Hui Ling is going to be here today to share more about the exciting things that are happening in the world of ESG financing. Right now, there's nothing in Southeast Asia. We would like to be the first, and we would like you to work with us on this. Next, for some of you, B2B solutions to companies seeking to be carbon neutral. Some of you are from banks. Soon, Scope 3 accountability is going to kick in. So maybe you want to consider offsetting your business travel. And if you want to do that by using SAF, you can talk to us also. We can work with fuel producers with you on this. And last, to co-invest on carbon projects and SAF production. I've already showed you just now some of the numbers. By 2035, the consumption of AirAsia of SAF is going to be almost equivalent to the entire output of an entire refinery. We will be the biggest single consumer of SAF and carbon credits in this region. Obviously, we're not just going to be a consumer. We would also like to consider what our opportunities to invest, both so that we can manage our prices and supply. So there's huge opportunities for us to look into here. And so that's essentially what I have to present today. And I hope that didn't come across too technical. All the things that I mentioned today will be in the booklet that you have. We've tried to do it in layman's terms as much as possible so it's accessible. But if you have any questions, I'll be around today. My team is around. And you can also email us as sustainability@airasia.com if you have further questions. Thank you.